Shut the doors, that'd be great. We got a pretty busy day. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of reverse my agenda a little bit. I'm going to work Senate Bill 68. And so that's the ROFR bill. And I believe there's, if you want to do an overview on it, and I believe there's a couple amendments. Yeah, why don't you do the overview real quick, and then we'll go from there. Go ahead, Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senate Bill number 68 would provide the ROFR, the state right of first refusal, for transmission owners to construct, upgrade, own, and maintain electric transmission lines that have been approved for construction in a regional transmission plan, essentially an SPP regional transmission plan. If there's two or more incumbent electric transmission owners who wish to exercise the ROFR and have connecting facilities that would connect to that transmission line, the exercise of that ROFR would be determined by mutual agreement between the two or more parties. To exercise the ROFR, an incumbent entity would have to provide notice within the time frame prescribed by the SPP for the transmission line project, and that entity would also need to seek or obtain a certificate of convenience and necessity from the KCC within at least 18 months following the submission of such notice. Subsection D of the bill would authorize any other entity to construct that transmission line if the incumbent does not choose to exercise the ROFR, and there's a provision in there that preserves the rights of incumbent electric transmission owners and their existing property rights, including their right to assign, the right to construct, upgrade, own, and maintain an electric transmission line. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there any questions? First comment I'm going to have is I do have an amendment, and it'll put a 10-year sunset on. If you want to pass that out, Nick, you can. Also, what I'm having Lindsay pass out right now is I've asked the KCC to go over the last few days, go over the rates and the different rate categories and try to give me, you know, what the rates are in each class for the last 9 or 10 years, what inflation's done, and how much. I just want to show comparison of where the rates have kind of moved. So this is my amendment, just putting a 10-year sunset on the bill. So are there any questions on that amendment? I'm going to make that motion. Do I have a second? Pittman makes the second. Any questions or comments? Not seeing any. All in favor? Senator Francisco, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm assuming this would not, or I actually know this would not limit the ability of the legislature to make a change earlier if they felt that intervening projects led the legislature at the time to believe that it should be sunsetted earlier.
With 63 and 21 and a governor, you can do about anything. Okay. So I don't know if that answers your question. I was just trying to say, let's look at this again in 10 years. If this passes all the way through, this is gives the legislature another shot of looking at, you know, at the bill. So I heard some complaints, and I thought that would ease one. Do you have any other comments? Not seeing any. Go ahead, Senator Pittman.
Thank you. I know it's pretty straightforward. It ends in 10 years. If there was a bid project out there 2 years into the horizon, I'm just thinking about it. Maybe it's not a question, but these things are like 2-3 years out. I suppose the timing on the bid project, well, they'll just have to figure out how this impacts them 10 years down the road, see if there's some projects out there that they're bidding on that might come down the line. So
I imagine this would be approval, but I mean, as we get closer to that, you know, if the project's already approved by this date, then it would fall under. If not, then it would, we'll see what the legislature does. Or they could change it in the future, as Senator Francisco said. This is just a guarantee where the legislature would get a look at it in 10 years. Doesn't mean that they can't change it from now to then. Are there any other questions, comments? Okay, we got a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay. Passes. Okay, do we have any other amendments? Senator Byers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have an amendment. Nick, it's KEPCO, the KEPCO amendment. And basically, this is amendment worked out with KEPCO, and it strikes the lines 35 through 38, and it's compromise language between Midwest and KEPCO. And that would be a motion.
You have a motion. Do we have a second? I'll second it. This is kind of some negotiated language between the parties, is my understanding. I think it's a good amendment.
You're passing it out. Can we?
Yeah, let's. You want to explain it, Nick?
Second.
I did. You want to go ahead and explain it, Nick?
Yes, so committee, in the definition of incumbent electric transmission owner, there was some language that it generally was very broad, included anybody that owns, controls, operates, or manages any equipment or plant for the transmission, delivery, or furnishing of electricity. But then there was also a provision, and this again was suggested by KEPCO to be removed, that stated that the entity has to also be approved by the regional transmission organization as qualified to provide proposals to construct those transmission lines subject to those competitive bids at the SPP level. So this is striking that extra contingency there about the requirement that they have to be approved to construct those lines by the SPP.
Okay, do we have any questions? Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're striking the words regional transmission organization as part of this phrase. So do we need to have a definition in the bill of regional transmission organization?
Is that to Nick?
That is to Nick.
Yes, there is a definition for regional transmission organization in the bill. I know this amendment cuts off on page 2. If you pull the bill out, that definition appears on pages 2 and 3 of the actual text of the bill.
Okay, does that answer your question? Senator Pittman, go ahead.
So it looks like this amendment basically is if we have somebody who's responsible with partners, not all the partners need to be necessarily on the approval list, but they can be involved with the transaction, so to speak. But they don't all need to be in agreement that this thing's going forward. Is that correct? So that we're not holding up the process with maybe somebody who's a small partner?
Go ahead and say that again.
It sounds like this amendment is to make sure if we have multiple parties involved, there might be a smaller partner who just is running some things, is not necessarily part and parcel to the deal itself or the bid itself. This is taking them out of the approval process, it sounds like. But they can still be a part of it, but it's just that they don't need to say yes.
Right.
Okay.
Senator Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the question was about smaller partners. What, I don't understand.
This would be like the co-ops, right?
Well, I mean, this is just striking that contingency language. I mean, that's all it's doing is striking that contingency language. So there's not that extra requirement upon the incumbent transmission owner. So if the incumbent and transmission owner has connecting facilities and they are providing transmission delivery or furnishing of electricity or electric power in the state, they are an incumbent transmission owner and they could exercise their ROFR absent any requirement that they have that approval in this definition from the SPP to construct that line.
Okay.
So this is striking I guess, a layer of approval, a layer of protection that we ensure that incumbent electric transmission owners are duly approved by the regional transmission organization? That's what the striking would do, what the amendment would do, right? I mean, I guess it says right there, it takes out the approval.
My understanding, this is for like the co-ops, right? KEPCO wanted this language to be put in there. They asked for this in their testimony, my understanding, and this was negotiated amongst the parties to take that out, so.
Could I have a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
You said negotiated amongst the parties. Are we talking about all the incumbent electric transmission owners?
Well, whoever worked on the amendment, I don't know. I didn't work on this amendment.
Okay, I guess that would be my question then, was who worked on bringing the amendment. I remember we had ITC testify about it, but we're, I guess, ratepayers, they wouldn't be at the table regarding this amendment?
Well, this is between Midwest Energy and KEPCO, the rural electric co-ops working together. Those are the two parties that I'm aware of.
And they had asked each other to strike this out, or was there someone else?
Yes, that's true. They agreed upon this.
My understanding was in their testimony, they asked to have this taken out, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So following up on that, what then is the understanding by being a transmission owner that you have met the requirements of the Kansas Corporation Commission?
Are you asking? You asking?
Well, I'm saying since we're taking out this approval by a regional transmission organization to say whether these entities are qualified, I'm assuming it reverts to the KCC, and just wondering how that takes place.
I don't think it does, but go ahead, Nick.
Well, most likely, if any of these entities own transmission lines, at some point in time, they went through the siting process at the KCC to site those transmission lines, and they have a certificate of convenience granted by the KCC to own and manage those transmission lines and run those. So the KCC would have some oversight in that regard, as they're operating under a certificate of convenience under the KCC.
And this transmission, their ownership has to be of a line that's greater than 100 kV.
Okay. Yeah, this bill would apply to those lines greater than 100 kV. The KCC siting process, I will mention, is for lines 235 or more.
Other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if the amendment were to pass, then the right of first refusal would be granted to any, I guess, small partner, large partner, as others have discussed, any electric transmission owner in Kansas. Do I have that right? I guess that's a question for the revisor, but because there would be no overall approval of who is an electric transmission owner, incumbent or not. I just find it a little worrisome to grant a right of first refusal, essentially a monopoly, to someone who is not kind of duly approved to construct and upgrade or own and maintain electric transmission lines in Kansas.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I might add, it is a line approved by the SPP. And then I also might add extra together that ITC and Sunflower and proponents agreed on this language. So to me, I still see that group working together on the proposed amendment.
May I make a comment, Mr. Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
I think, and maybe it's a question for the revisor, the proposed amendment seeks to strike out and is approved by the regional transmission organization. So aren't we striking with the amendment approval by SPP?
I don't think so. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and this might be getting at the SPP's approval process for competitive solicitations and bids that of companies that are authorized to enter that competitive bidding process. But generally, Senator, you're correct, but the only thing is that an incumbent electric transmission owner has to have connecting facilities. So if the facilities that are connecting this new transmission line would be connecting to their facilities, that would be the incumbent electric transmission owner that could exercise the ROFR.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, not seeing any. We've got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Against, nay?
Nay.
Okay, ayes have it. Okay, are there any further amendments? Go ahead, Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought that was the easier one. So we're going to try one with you municipalities. And Nick has the Muni amendment. And if he can describe it, but it does do three things. I'll just tell you what I know, and then Nick can fill in the blanks. It adds a new section on line 2, page 2, line 26, making clear that nothing in this bill interferes with the rights of municipality utilities to develop, construct, upgrade, or own and maintain transmission facilities. It adds on the second part, it adds a definition of incumbent electric transmission owner, line 2, page 2, line 31. And the third strikes the language on page 2, line 35, stating that the words and continuing through to line 38, stopping after organization. The same language that Midwest Energy and KEPCO had sought to strike.
Okay, we have a motion. Pittman seconds. Do we have any questions? Not seeing it. Oh, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is allowing a municipal-owned utility to bid transmission across the state outside their municipality if it's being connected to something that they own. So in some ways, it seems to me an expansion of the responsibilities of a municipality to be the owner of a significantly large transmission line.
Senator Bowers.
Senator Pittman had a question here, and I'm seeing nods of no in the audience too.
I was just going to say I stand in support of this amendment. I think that organizations like the BPU will want to make sure that nothing interferes with their right to construct these transmission facilities, and it does add municipal corporations the definition of incumbent electrician transmission owners, but most municipalities are not going to embark on such a huge project as this, I don't think. Maybe the BPU could, but I doubt that they're really thinking that they want to expand a transmission project across the state of Kansas, but I hear your concern.
Well, and I think another thing, like BPU, I believe they bought the power from Bowersock Dam, the green energy, so I don't know if they have some transmission or how they're, stuff like that could apply to that. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I think that's in Lawrence.
The generation that you're talking about is in Lawrence and is applied to BPU, so there's obviously some transmission to get that there. Again, these electric transmission owners are defined as providing that service, but then we go on to say, I guess I'm still confused, I'm back. If there are 2 or more incumbent electric transmission owners of an electric transmission line, and the electric transmission line in that definition sets the rating of 100 kilovolts or more. So I'm still trying to see how all these pieces fit together.
I think you're stuck amendment backwards.
I am.
We're on the two boxes.
Municipalities.
Yeah, the municipalities. Are there any further questions on this? Senator Warren, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along the lines of the questions I asked about the last amendment, I guess for the carrier of the amendment, who was consulted with bringing and writing this amendment? We heard a couple of days of testimonies from proponents, and we heard a couple of days of testimony from opponents of the bill. So did the proponents and the opponents get together and came up with this, or how was this put together?
Senator Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the proponents, and it's in Kimberly Swatty's neutral comments in our committee hearing, and it was agreed upon language with the municipalities and the proponents of the bill.
Were any opponents part of the discussion in bringing the amendment?
This I do not know.
And one other question, if I might.
Go ahead.
Thank you. This amendment and the prior amendment seem to carve out some exceptions for co-ops and municipalities, and I'd have to ask with the reviser, but that might be, if I'm recalling correctly, while the Texas ROFR bill was found to be unconstitutional. So maybe I don't have that right, but if we have maybe an answer to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Nick, can you give an answer to that?
I think that with the Texas Circuit Court case at the Fifth Circuit level, the main thing where they found overt discrimination under the Commerce Clause was because the Texas ROFR went into the Certificate of Convenience statute in the Texas law and basically barred the Public Utilities Commission in Texas from granting any certificate of convenience to any out-of-state entity. So I think that was why overt discrimination was found there, is just because that it was a complete bar to any out-of-state entrance, and I hope that helps a little bit.
Okay. Any more comments? Not seeing any. We got a motion, a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay? No. Passes. Okay, is there any further amendments, or do we have a motion on the bill? I'll move that we pass Senate Bill 68 out favorable for passage as amended. Do we have a second? Pittman seconds. Questions or comments? Go ahead, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I want to thank the proponents and the opponents for their time and their testimony and discussing this very complicated yet important issue for Kansas ratepayers. I think it's our obligation to represent Kansans and not a particular industry or a corporation, and it's difficult to see that without the competition that this bill would provide, that how do we ensure that we have lower rates for our ratepayers in Kansas. I know knocking doors, I hear constantly concerns from Kansans about high electric rates, and with guaranteed of rights of, or excuse me, return on investment guaranteed to some of the energy providers. Again, how does that benefit our Kansas ratepayers? So I have concerns about the bill, and they've just wanted to express that. And again, appreciate the proponents and the opponents' time in presenting their testimony to committee over the last couple of days. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions or comments? Senator Cluse?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've been sitting through all these meetings here in the debates, I think it is, as echo Senator Warren's thoughts, very complex, and I am going to be a yes to get this out. I'm looking at my district. also looking at the fact of having more debate on the floor. Saying that doesn't mean I'll be a yes on the floor when we revisit it. But at the same time, I feel like for where we're at and the amount of information and the complexity of this, that's where I'm at this point. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Francisco, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also appreciate all the proponents and the opponents, and both sides have been very willing to provide a lot of information to us and answer some sticky questions and try to understand where we are. I did appreciate especially the neutral testimony from CURB, although they said we are not in a position to be more than a high level. I think we saw that same, there are two sides to this from the KCC, from some other neutral testimony. But I think that CURB was asking that incumbent electric transmission owners demonstrate to this committee that the bill will lead both to a reliable transmission system and just and reasonable rates. And I think we've had questions about those rates, questions about the cost. I understand we're doing this today. We'll probably have more discussion on the floor.
Sure we will. Further questions or comments? Not seeing any. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Against, nay?
Nay.
Would you like to be recorded? The ayes have it, number one. Does the nays want to be recorded?
Could we have a show of votes by hand?
Sure. A division. All in favor, please signify by raising your hand. All against? Okay, it passes. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, let's move on to our agenda that we had set for today. The bill is passed out of committee. Okay, we'll start off by, we'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 88. Nick, give us an overview on Senate Bill 88, please.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, Senate Bill 88 would provide for the statewide election of the Corporation Commission. It would establish the Utilities Regulation Division within the Office of the Attorney General. It would exempt the Corporation Commission from the requirements of the Kansas Open Meetings Act, and it would make a few other related revisions that I'll get into as we go through this. Starting with the statewide elections piece. These would be, again, commenced and conducted as statewide elections. They would be during the even-numbered general election years, just as you all are elected in. The commissioners would serve for 4-year terms as elected officials, and generally the same laws that are applicable to other statewide elections would be applicable to the election of the Corporation Commission. So the way this gets started, these elections, this election schedule gets started by essentially when a commissioner's appointed term ends is when an election will follow. So the bill designates commission positions 1, 2, and 3 based on their term end date. So commission position 1 is designated for the commissioner whose term ends on March 15 of 2024. The general election of 2024 would be when the election is held for that commission position. So if there are multiple persons of a political party on the ballot that wish to run and file, there would be a primary election conducted in that year, in August of that year, and then the general election would follow in November of 2024 for that position. That commissioner would take office in 2025, just the same date that you all take office. Commission position 2 would be declared for the commissioner whose term ends on March 15 of 2026. And the general election of 2026 would be when the election occurs for that commission position. and then that commissioner would take office in January of 2027. Commission position 3 would be declared for the commissioner whose term will end on March 15 of 2027. A little bit of a lag time here, but the general election of 2028 would be when the election for that commissioner occurs, and that commissioner would take office in 2029. And I will note, when this commission position 3 is elected, this would be when commission position 1 is served 4 years and would be up for another election or re-election. So commission positions 1 and 3 would be elected together. Position 2 would be elected 2 years later. I know, like I said, there's a little bit of lag time there, so the bill does provide that just as in current law, the term of any commissioner may be extended until a successor is elected. The current commissioner could continue serving until the successor is elected, or the bill also provides the ability for the governor to go ahead and appoint a member, subject to Senate confirmation, to fulfill the remainder of that term until a member is elected and takes office pursuant to the election. While these elections are occurring, the bill provides that the KCC chairperson would be appointed by the governor until the commission is fully elected. So commencing next year in February 2024, if the bill were to take effect and be passed by you, the governor would appoint the chairperson of the commission for a 1-year term, and that appointment would be made in each year until the commission is fully elected. The bill provides that no chairperson can serve a consecutive 3 or more consecutive terms as the chairperson. And then beginning in 2029, just as provided in current law, the KCC, the commission, would begin to select its chairperson again. Section 2 of the bill adds a provision to the campaign finance laws, and Section 2 would provide that any public utility would be prohibited from contributing to a candidate. A campaign committee established by the utility could not contribute to a candidate, or any campaign committee that receives contributions from a utility could not contribute to a candidate. And it goes the other way too. A candidate would be prohibited from accepting any contributions from any of those sources as well. So that completes generally the elections piece. Also, as I said, the bill establishes the Utilities Regulation Division within the Office of the Attorney General. The director of this division would be appointed by the Attorney General, and the director would be authorized under the bill to hire staff, including attorneys, accountants, economists, etc. The duties of this division, and as you'll see, it's generally you'll see some employee transfers here soon. The developing a position in front of the KCC on behalf of rate-related matters for the KCC to make determinations in utility rate cases. So the duties in this bill for this division would be established to include the representation and protection of the collective interests of all Kansas utility ratepayers in utility rate-related proceedings before the State Corporation Commission, and then in any other judicial proceeding. The division would be required to advocate for reasonable, affordable, and regionally competitive utility rates, would be required to balance the interests of residential, business, and industrial customers, to promote the long-term, cost-effective, and reasonable solutions to issues faced by the utility industry, and then finally, eliminate corporate waste and unnecessary spending by public utilities. And as I said, the bill provides for a staff transfer where certain staff of the Kansas Corporation Commission would be transferred to this utilities division that's established by the Attorney General, or established within the Attorney General's office. So on January 1 of 2024, this staff transfer would occur. And it generally, any staff of the KCC that is there to establish a non-binding staff position in rate-related matters before the KCC would be transferred. This would not include telecommunications staff, and the bill does provide that the AG and the Kansas Corporation Commission shall collaborate to effectuate this staff transfer. Some other provisions in the bill authorize this Utilities Regulation Division in the AG's office to recover the costs of that division for the expenses incurred in relation to the regulation of public utilities. So it amends two statutes, 66-1502, which concerns reimbursable expenses. So the AG's division would be able to assess costs under that, reimbursable expenses, and those are for investigations and then appraisals of utility property. And then also it amends 66-1503, which relates to quarterly expenses, which is generally just all other expenses incurred by the regulator in its public utility regulation duty. Lastly, there is the last provision of the bill, the last section of the bill exempts the KCC from the provisions of the Kansas Open Meetings Act. And then, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note that if the committee does take this up and work it, I would probably prepare and have the committee and urge the committee to consider a technical amendment to just clean up a few technical items. And I could discuss those with you, the chair and the committee at the appropriate time.
Okay. We'll go ahead and get the, is there questions? Senator Corson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do these folks run as members of a political party, these commissioner candidates?
Yes, so there's nothing here in the bill to say that these would be not affiliated with any political party. So these would be partisan elections.
Okay.
Senator Pittman?
Just because I'm so new to this committee, could you just, 30 seconds or less, how the process of the appointment of the KCC commissioners works today so we can have a contrast with the election? I don't need a complete overview since everybody here probably knows more about it than I do.
Certainly. So yes, and I should have gotten into that. The commissioners are appointed by the governor and subject to confirmation by the Senate. And their terms are, as you can see in the bill, they're kind of staggered, ending on March 15 of any given year. But yes, governor appointment, subject to confirmation by the Senate, and then no more from two political party can be appointed by the governor.
And there's 3 members.
Yep.
Okay, further questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have some duties plugging abandoned oil wells that are probably not going to come under the new utility division. So they still report now to this elected group of commissioners?
So this wouldn't change up any KCC duties, obligations, regulatory efforts. This is, and you can see in that staff transfer, it's keyed in on those non-binding staff positions and to argue on behalf of ratepayers in front of the KCC in rate-related matters. So this division would be the one that would be presenting those non-binding recommendations to the Corporation Commission for the Corporation Commission to then decide where to go with the utility rate case.
Okay. Let's go ahead and go to proponents. First one up, Paul Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul Snyder, representing Kansans for lower electric rates. Last 24 hours, what a whirlwind. Super Bowl, voting out ROFR is the down. Let's get this roller coaster back up on a high note. Okay. Thank you, committee. Thank you. Appreciate you hearing this important issue. You know, I understand that there's a lot of trepidation among some to change a regulatory administrative body in the state. This is something new. The KCC, I think, was first established in the late 1800s, and in the 20s or 30s was kind of conformed the way it is today. So roughly, you know, going on 90 years of you know, doing what they've been doing, and any change may seem foreign or scary, but we're in a tough spot here. We've got regionally uncompetitive rates, and where we're headed is not a good place either. We once had rates that were below the regional average, and now we're much above that. And then a weird twist, because we're part of the SPP and joint dispatching and all that, we have access to the lowest wholesale costs in the country. Yet Kansas has the highest rates in the region. So go figure. It's clear that the regulatory model isn't working, and we need a change. So this bill, Senate Bill 88, is a subject to that change after a lot of thought and serious consideration and deliberation amongst different parties on how best to do this. And it was settled on electing the Corporation Commission to make them more accountable to the citizens of Kansas, the ratepayers of Kansas. So Nick went through, I'm not going to go through line by line. Nick did a great job kind of highlighting that. But the nut is that the 3 commissioners would stand for election. Those would be statewide partisan elections by, I believe it is 2028. That commission then would be turned over to elected officials. Do want to point out the exemption from COMA. We've heard from multiple stakeholders that there is an inability of the Corporation Commission to really be more forward-thinking, forward-looking, and the reason for that is that they all just, the 3 of them, sit in their office, and then you have a general counsel that just shuttles documents back and forth. They don't really talk to each other about substantive issues. So maybe exempting them from COMA isn't the right answer, but we need to find a way that they can collaborate and do what you all envision them to do, which is look out for the ratepayers of Kansas. And that's something they're not doing today. 10 states elect commissioners. A full 1/3 of the SPP does that. So this obviously works. I mentioned flippantly the comment that the first conferee last week on ROFR was from an elected state. These things can work. Our chairman, of course, for 20-some years was part of a water board in Johnson County that was elected to set rates and water quality issues. And then, of course, we have 28 or so co-ops that do the very same thing. They elect people to set their rates. So this is a model that can work. And, of course, I don't remember if Nick mentioned this, but much of this bill is modeled after what happens in Oklahoma. I think all of you are probably well aware that parts of Oklahoma, if you're served by an investor-owned utility customer, you're going to be paying anywhere from 20 to 40% less than you do in Kansas. So I think there's some models and parts of that we can take. We did choose to try to prohibit regulated utilities from participating in elections. You know, when we first started talking about this, people were concerned, well, wouldn't Evergy just now control elections? And maybe they would, we'll see, but the current process isn't working. So we, tried to say that they shouldn't be participating. And the plain reason is they're the biggest, I believe, the biggest political spender in Kansas. So let's get ratepayers on equal footing with that. The other thing that we do in this is move a lot of the staff to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office has a stated position of being a consumer advocate. So moving the lawyers over there certainly would just join a cadre of other well-equipped, well-trained lawyers, and then moving the staff, the key utility staff. And again, as Nick mentioned, the expectation is that the KCC will sit down with the Attorney General and figure out how that staff transition works. But stakeholders, and it's been mentioned in the media, that stakeholders just don't believe they're getting an equal footing when they deal with the commission, and that the commission leans far too heavily on the staff. So the solution is just separate them and get them in a different position. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the bill, but let me tell you about why we think this bill is needed. There have been several distinct instances over the last 5 or 6 years that have drawn us to this point. The first, and so I'll rattle off several of those. The first, there's been no action from the commission on competitive rates. In 2018, this body passed a Senate concurrent resolution that basically acknowledged we had high rates and called on the KCC to do everything in their legal and lawful ability to control rates, and if not, come back to us, meaning the Senate, and tell us what tools you need. None of you have received anything from the KCC. They've proposed no bills in the Senate to try to do that. They've opened no dockets to try to accomplish that task. And in 2019, the rate study bill, the intention was to craft forward-looking electric policy that leads to regionally competitive rates and reliable service. Again, the commission has opened no dockets or any other actions to try to move forward on that. In my testimony, I've got several graphs and charts about how our investor-owned utility rates compare to states surrounding Kansas. Our contention is that the KCC is aligned with utilities. I think other people might give examples as well, but when we did the rate study bill in 2019, there were stakeholder discussions. Senator Masterson got us all in a room, told us to meet and figure things out, and then, you take a break to strategize. All the ratepayers stayed in one room. The KCC went in the room with the utilities. Where is that balance? The KCC has failed to act on motions for transparency. Our group, the Kansas Industrial Consumers Group, along with the Climate and Energy Project, Sierra Club, and other stakeholders, has asked on several occasions for more transparency in public filings at the Commission. The Commission hasn't even ruled on those. There have been no public hearings in 3 years at the KCC. Think about that. No public hearings. Everything is virtual. You all promptly got back to work in 2021 and have been meeting with people, having constituent meetings, have been present and available. They've been unwilling to act on future costs of the STP. In August of 2020, Evergy announced their Sustainability Transformation Plan, which is a capital spending plan. They rightly got concerned because Elliott Management was in the mix at the time. And so they opened a docket and did some public hearings, not public, but offered virtual hearings. And so that was important. But what's the outcome? There were no actions taken. It's one thing to talk, actions are quite another. Last year, so you'll remember in February of 2021, there was Winter Storm Uri and gas bills went up through the roof, skyrocketed. We ended up with $700 million in gas cost that had to be recovered. So utilities all filed their motions, hey, we had these gas costs, we need some sort of special way to recover those. And they got 100% of those recovered. Every single person in Kansas is going to be paying more for those gas costs over a 10-year period. Everyone is paying, unless you're Evergy, Black Hills, Kansas Gas, Atmos Energy, maybe a handful of others. But the Commission deemed that 100% of the risk for high gas cost, a weather abnormality like that, should fall on customers, and utilities would bear zero risk, even though we pay them a return on equity, assuming they're in a business with some amount of risk. The Commission has opposed ratepayer legislation that my group has ordered, specifically around the transmission delivery charge, and stood up in committees and opposed that. And as a result, we've continued to have TDC increases year after year. Finally, they mislead on rate data. They've come before different committees, not so much this committee this year, but certainly I know some of you have reached out to the Commission on different avenues of rate data. And the Commission provides data that is without context. Evergy rates have been somewhat flat over the last 5 years. That's a good thing. But there's no context on why that's happening. And that's because hundreds of millions of dollars in tax credits and tax deductions and merger credits have led to that. The Commission never mentions that next week or even this week, they're filing for a transmission delivery charge increase, or in April, they're going to be filing for one of the biggest rate increases in the history of the state. Conveniently, that gets left out of the conversation. It's one thing for Evergy to not mention those things. It's quite another for a regulator to not mention those. Imagine, if you will, a space shuttle taking off. You get that cloud of water vapor and gas before it's taking off. That's the rumble of rate increases kind of just forming and collecting. We've been hearing that since 2020, and the Commission's done nothing. Now we're going to see how high that rate rocket wants to go, and we'll all be at the mercy. Every area of Kansas is hurting with high electric rates, and this is a way that we can start to control and bring the balance back to let ratepayers have a stronger voice and make the Commission more accountable to the people of Kansas. Thank you, committee. Happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, we'll try to, let's see if we can do one more. Eric Stafford.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Sam Sackett from Wichita is up today, and he won't be able to be back tomorrow.
Now let's go ahead and do Sam Sackett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to go today. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Peterson, Ranking Member Francisco, thank you for creating the opportunity to for us to be able to speak today about Senate Bill 88 and the reforms that it proposes to bring to the Kansas Corporation Commission in order to achieve regionally competitive electricity rates. Again, I'm Sam Sackett with Spirit Aerosystems, and we're proud to employ more than 11,000 Kansans here in Wichita, in addition to having hundreds of Kansas suppliers located throughout the state that employ thousands more Kansans in order to feed into our operations. All of us would benefit from reforms to the KCC because of the regionally high uncompetitive electricity rates. The KCC sets rates, fees, and energy taxes. That authority was granted by the legislature in order for the KCC to regulate those. So we're left today coming back to the legislature to ask for some reforms, some changes to how the authority that you've granted to the KCC could change in a way that would benefit all ratepayers, not one class of ratepayers, not industrial, not just commercial, not residential, but all ratepayers. The legislature and the governor have already acknowledged that we don't have competitive rates here in Kansas. We have some of the highest rates in the region when it comes to electricity rates. And Kansas, as a result, cannot compete in the same way that other states are able to compete in terms of electricity rates. One of my colleagues, less than a week ago, testified before this committee, which we appreciate that opportunity, testifying against what we call the Monopoly Bill of Rights. In the context of our transmission delivery charge having increased more than 375% since 2010. That's an energy tax, it's a surcharge. It's authorized by the legislature, and the KCC, right, is involved in determining what happens with those TDCs. Despite demand being relatively flat for the last 2 decades, we've had massively higher investments in the transmission infrastructure that has resulted in higher rates on everyone's bills. Thanks to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 passed by Congress on the federal income tax side, and then actions by the legislature, many of you, in 2020 to address the income taxes on utilities, ratepayers received some relief in some downward pressure on rates that they wouldn't have otherwise have received. And we applaud those income tax policies that resulted in some relief to ratepayers. But the current regulatory structure is unable today or unwilling to better manage rates. And we can't just rely on the legislature or Congress addressing federal income tax policy in order to affect electricity rates.
We got about 3 minutes, and then we have to give the room up, just so you know.
The KCC has repeatedly not delivered for ratepayers. The accountability to ratepayers just doesn't exist today in a meaningful way. The framework is ineffective in curbing high electricity costs. The KCC advocates for policies and positions before federal and regulatory bodies and before the state legislature that are often positions that are aligned with utilities, but they are at the expense of ratepayers of all classes. We have witnessed the KCC staff conferring with, planning with, strategizing with, and coordinating with the investor-owned utility on policies that are aligned with utilities, but that are at odds with the best interest of ratepayers. We need a new level of accountability. We need more accountability between the commissioners who set rates and the ratepayers who have to pay the electric bills. I won't go into the details as Paul before kind of described what the bill would do, but I hope that you will take seriously this proposal, debate it thoroughly. There are a lot of complexities to it that we acknowledge, but it's a real proposal that can be debated and decided upon, because what we're saying today, my message with you that I'd like to leave is, please don't be content with our current regulatory framework. It doesn't work for ratepayers. Again, all ratepayers, not just one class. And what we're saying is to leave the status quo is a vote of confidence in our current system, and it needs reformed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We really just don't have any time for questions. Can we just hold the questions until tomorrow? And we'll pick this back up. We got to get out of here because there's a committee trying to come in. So with that, we'll suspend the hearing until tomorrow. Thank you. We're adjourned.